Alright, it's time to have a very serious talk about Islam. Now, before going into any talk about Islamophobia, because we all know it's coming, let me reiterate something I said about a month ago, and say that I have a very profound respect for Islam and the view of life that it provides for its adherents. It is a more holistically meaningful life, a more psychologically compelling and emotionally fulfilling life than the life that the post-Christian West has on offer at the moment. It crosses out more of the boxes on Maslow's hierarchical checklist, including many subsections in the self-actualization section that we might call spirituality. It's far more magnetic than the materialist void that we have found ourselves in today, a result of post-structuralism breaking down old value systems and a capitalist market filling in its own mechanism in its place. I respect Islam's strength, and I respect its virility, and if you don't see these two latter virtues, then you ought to go and recheck the global population breakdown by faith, as well as the respective rates of growth of these faiths. As it stands, Islam is well on its way to world domination. If I were a Muslim, I would be quite happy and proud. However, I am not a Muslim. I will never be a Muslim, unlike many progressives who, upon seeing that converting Muslims into their progressive faith won't work, will be too cowardly to do what actually has to be done, to fight if necessary, and so will convert themselves. They've already begun doing this in Europe, in many cases. They have enough courage to join a safely popular bandwagon on social media, but not enough to be selective with friends, for example, based upon principles. Well, they might unfriend me for saying what I'm about to say, or what I've already said, but they know that I'll never show up at their house and slit their throat, or their family's throat, for it, or do that for mocking my own religious icons. They certainly don't have the courage to pick up a gun, let alone to fly a plane into a building. Many Europeans, as I've said, are already doing this, are giving in and submitting, if not completely converting, as the very name of the religion commands. I will never be a Muslim, and nor can Western civilization be Islamic, because by the West I mean the culture and the values that the West embodies, the inheritance of history, of literature, of art, and ideals that began in Greece, which grew in Rome, which flourished in Britain and France and Italy, and then were refined more precisely in America, including such notions as freedom, some elements of democracy, equality before the law, I would say art in its modern form, a particular kind of human glory, science as a method of understanding the world around us, and if we're being honest, Christianity as well. I'll go more into this later. All of these are in diametric and existential opposition to the foundation of Islam, which are absolute submission to God and to the Word of God as revealed by Muhammad, supposedly a prophet, in the Quran and in the Hadiths. These are to be accepted as absolute truth, not questionable. And while there are different interpretations about how best to implement the finer details, the end goals and the broader notions of acceptable behavior and what people are supposed to do are very clearly laid out and understood. Now, with revealed absolute truth, it makes very little sense to allow for divergence from what you already know with perfect certainty to be true. Why would you? And Islam is certain about everything. Islam is not merely a religion. It is not merely a guide to one's spiritual life. It is a total solution, a final solution, if you will, to all of life's concerns. It is, in its very essence, fascistic in this manner. It is a legal system. It is a political system. It is a social system. It's an economic system. It's a romantic system. It is, of course, a spiritual system. It is even a hygiene system, not to mention a culinary system. All rolled up in one package that we talk about as a religion, as if it was comparable in nature to, say, Christianity, or to Buddhism, or to Hinduism. Now, before I go into the specifics of what makes Islam uniquely dangerous, let me attempt to lower your defenses a little bit, and the unwillingness that you no doubt have about religion, this religion in particular, being a causal factor in violence and nonviolence, at least as religions compare to each other. Sam Harris likes to bring up the Jains when this subject comes up, who, while their symbol ironically happens to be the swastika, of all things, practice non-violence as the literal core to their doctrine in the extreme. Jains often drink through cheesecloth so as not to accidentally swallow an insect. Obviously, they're vegetarians, but not just vegetarians. The pious ones won't even eat plants that were harvested while still alive, only eating what had already died naturally. Murder is, of course, beyond taboo. Not so with my own favorite example, the Thugi Faithful Tiger cult. I like talking about it in part because, like the German Nazi Party, it no longer exists. They were wiped out by the British in the 19th century. And so people feel a little bit less reticent about condemning it, because they're not going to offend anyone. They're all dead. I also like it because the behavior of the Thugis, from whom we get the word thug, by the by, was obviously theologically motivated when you learn about it. And I like bringing them up finally because they are, to my knowledge, the most extreme example and the most difficult example to argue against on the subject of religion and violence. During the 450 years of their existence, this very, very, very small cult, very, very tiny, killed over 1 million people. Guinness Book of World Records documents says 2 million. The numbers are sort of vary. As an aside, they did this almost exclusively with garrots, symbolic of the sacred cords of hair, whom their goddess Kali had supposedly given them, with which to dispatch the demons, or the non-believers, from the world, thus cleansing it. No guns or bombs for them. And this, again, from a very, very small group. Ideas are not all equal. Milton's defense of free speech is not equivalently violent to the notion that a demon goddess wants you to kill off as many people as possible with rope. Religions, being ideas, are not all equivalent, nor are they equal. Now, with this laid out and hopefully accepted, we can return to the matter of Islam. Islam is not a religion of peace. It is a religion of submission. By voluntary submission if possible, for this is preferable, it's more effective. But if not possible, then submission by war. The Quran is one of the only religious texts with a built-in guide on how to read it. When there is a conflict between passages, the latter verse is to be taken over the preceding verse. Very simple, very clear. Turns out that not only are there more violent verses, and here we are talking about explicit calls to violence, not mere mentions of historical violence in a sort of and this happened kind of way. But they occur later in the Quran as well, than do the more peaceful ones, the peaceful ones that progressives leap to find whenever they decide to pick up a religious text, if they ever pick up a religious text. Islamic scholarship still, to this day, sometimes refers to the world as in a dichotomous split between Dar al-Islam, on one side, the House of Islam, House of Submission, and Dar al-Harb on the other, the House of War. If you are not in Islam, then it is a war region. And there's a third one, which is like, it's not convenient to be at war with this section just yet. Indeed, this attitude about things belonging to Islam applies not only to land, including Spain and France and Eastern Europe, East Timor, and let's not forget Israel, but also to people. And this sort of philosophy arguably explains the injunction to kill those who leave the faith. Now, furthermore, pious Muslims are commanded to follow the example of Muhammad. Well, who was Muhammad? He was a businessman turned warlord. He was a military man and a conquering general, spreading the faith by the sword. He killed poets and comedians who mocked him. He consummated his marriage to Aisha when she was 9. Now, Muhammad was, supposedly, as near to a perfect human being as a person can be. He is their ideal. Now, one of the things you'll hear people say is, well, who are you to speak for Islam? By what authority do you claim to speak on behalf of 1.6 billion people? Are you an expert? And it's always worth observing that no one mentions this argument when Christianity, a far more complex and ambiguous faith, is criticized. Imagine asking, for example, someone else, how can you criticize Christianity for the Inquisition and for the Children's Crusades? Have you spent 10 years studying the nuances of Aquinas, Tertullian, and Chesterton? Where's your PhD? As if credentials were needed to have an opinion about a subject. Now, the day these people voluntarily give up their own voting rights for lack of a PhD in history, political science, or economics, maybe I'll consider taking this criticism more seriously. Maybe. But here comes Alec Baldwin, a PhD in Islamic studies, if I recall correctly, and behind him virtually the entire progressive left, asking with venomous incredulity how someone like Sam Harris or Bill Maher or myself has the audacity to speak negatively about Islam without a lifetime of dedicated study, as though Islam was this extraordinarily complex thing that takes an expert to understand all the nuances about. Now, there are a lot of nuances in Islam, don't get me wrong. It is a very complex thing, and these complexities and nuances do take years of study to understand, and are important to hash out if you accept the premise of the faith that there is a God who created the world, who created us for the purpose of following him, and to whom he gave a written instruction manual written exclusively in Arabic, of all languages, by which we may obey him. Then, perhaps, it's important to dive into the nuances. What are the most important laws? What is the order of precedence for conflicting obligations, and so on. But for those of us who don't accept the supernatural premise, and in fact think it's total hogwash, it really isn't that important to go into the nuances and the details. What is important to understand is what they believe, clearly, however generally, how many of them believe it, how strongly they believe it, and what kinds of effects these beliefs will have and are having. And you don't need to be an expert to understand these things. More importantly, none of the things that Westerners are really concerned about are among the sort of tricky, nuanced issues. Unless you really want to get legalistic about when it's acceptable to kill a man for being gay, rather than addressing the issue that it is acceptable to kill gays. And again, I can't help but notice the double standard when people talk about Christianity. The same progressives will very often reject Christianity in equivalent terms. It's this horrible bigoted faith and everything. These same progressives will very often reject Christianity in these terms, who have barely picked up a Bible in their lives, or have barely skimmed through it, or done the research about it. And as I said before, Christianity is a much more complex, nuanced, and ambiguous faith. There's many more contradictions. It doesn't have this built-in system for understanding it. And then they'll turn around and say that you can't criticize Islam because you can't possibly claim to speak on behalf of 1.6 billion people. Now, as it happens, I have read the Bible, as I've read the Quran, and I know more about Christianity and about Christian theology than most Christians do, because most Christians haven't read the Bible You may have noticed this. There's Pew data on this subject as well. Just as most of the 1.6 billion Muslims in the world haven't read the Quran. Funnily enough. You could say that I know more about Islam than most Muslims. And yet a Muslim who speaks, any Muslim anywhere, who speaks on behalf of their faith is accepted absolutely and without question as an expert by these leftists anyways, compared to an atheist who's done some theological shopping around. Now, just to entertain me, try to think of something that the Westboro Baptist Church, or that the KKK, or any of the other Salon and HuffPo bugaboos have done that is remotely as bad as what the Taliban or what ISIS does on an average afternoon. Remember, we're told right-wing extremists of the Christian variety are what we have to fear, not Muslims. Thanks, Salon. Now, besides this self-imposed expertise hurdle, there are two other impediments to our ability to face the problem of Islam, facing any problem being the necessary prerequisite for solving it. First, there is the unwillingness that people have to really see how bad Islam is and how bad the behavior of Muslims, or how the bad behavior of Muslims is inseparable from the faith. It's important to understand not merely the history of Islam here, but the historical source of this Western unwillingness to see the evil in our enemies. It comes from the Second World War. After we discovered what the Nazis had done to the Jews, and unfortunately this will not be the only mention of Nazis I'll be making here, Godwin be damned, to the Jews and to the homosexuals and to those who left or weren't sufficiently loyal to the party, and what they did to their neighboring states, to Poland, to Belgium, to France, and to the rest, and to Russia. After we saw all of this, we said, never again. Never again. But what we Westerners focused on in our desire to never see Nazism again was to make sure that we ourselves never became Nazis. It's a very noble thought. But in translation, this more or less meant that we never wanted to move even an inch in a direction that could be construed to ourselves as Nazi-like. Now, perhaps this was an admirable enough intention, but the effect is that in pursuit of not being Nazis, they, and I'm speaking mostly of the left here, we forbade ourselves from seeing anything bad in any outside group. There was many defenses of embracing the other. And you can see this phenomena in its modern form in full glory when progressives, in the face of Muslim rape gangs recently, the Taharush game, in Cologne and elsewhere, the disproportionate crimes of Muslim immigrants, or immigrants generally, really. And even in the face of terror attacks against Western nations, this was happening even when 9/11, days after 9/11, they always looked first and foremost for ways in which the right wing, fellow Westerners, not the other, could be found to be at fault. Never mind that Islam is at its core conservative to a T, far more right-wing than the right wing is. You cannot get more conservative than Islam. It is conservatism to a T. The 7th century happened. Now nothing must change. It is perfect right here. No progress is possible. Any deviation from this is regression. So, and everyone who calls them radicals is actually misusing the term in a way that used to really annoy Christopher Hitchens. An excellent example of a non-progressive leftist, but I digress. They are reactionary conservatives of the most extreme kind. More to the point, this is not some fringe group or fringe belief, even if only a fringe group is acting upon these notions. It is the core of the literalist faith, as is evidenced by the majority support, or at least majority sympathy, for the minority actions that we Westerners find so abhorrent and then try to differentiate from the 1.6 billion majority. And now we come to the reductio ad absurdum of the progressive leftist position. In pursuit of not allowing Nazism or anything like it, by not becoming Nazis themselves, the left has disallowed itself from seeing homicidal or fascistic tendencies in others. They want to be friends with everyone, especially the other, and pride themselves on the diversity of their circle of acquaintances, because this acquits them of any possibility of latent Nazi-like tendencies. I have a friend who's black, I have a friend who's gay, I have a friend who's Muslim, etc., etc. And conversely, if someone criticizes a culture, they'll ask that person, do you even have any friends from that group? Do you even have any black friends? Do you have any friends that are Muslim? They'll say this. The implication being, of course, that if they don't have any friends from that group, then they not only don't know what they're talking about, but are hating, because any criticism is hatred, don't you know, a group that they don't understand. They're a bigot, in other words. And this is a very sly move, of course, because if you have acquaintances in a particular group, then you might not want to speak badly of that group for fear of offending them. Everyone says, you know, they're fine with offending people, but you don't want to offend your friends if you really are friends. And of course, if you do speak badly of this group and those friends stop talking to you, then you no longer have any friends in that group, and the left can go back to pretending that you're ignorant on the matter, even if you do know more than they do. Brief digression, I actually spent several months attending Muslim Student Association meetings at Bellevue College myself, and talked almost exclusively with Muslims in my most recent month-long CDL training. But here is the question that you must ask yourselves, if this idea of being friends with everybody is appealing. I want you to imagine that you are in the 1930s in Germany and have read Mein Kampf, but don't yet have the certainty of historical hindsight to see what the final resolution of these ideas will be. You don't know what Nazism really means in the historical sense. The killing of Jews, of gays, of those insufficiently loyal to the party, and a serious and nearly successful attempt at world domination. All of this lies latent, however implicitly, in the pages of Mein Kampf. You just don't know with certainty what's going to happen. You can only guess based on the text. Would you brag about your friend group being diverse and including Nazis, as well as communists and whoever else? Would you challenge friends who criticized Hitler and Germany's National Socialism, asking them, oh, do you even have any Nazi friends? With hindsight, of course, no progressive in his right mind, and probably no liberal for that matter, would be friends with a Nazi, even though many left-leaners were friends with Nazis back in the day. They are the enemy. They are, in fact, the benchmark of what it means to be an enemy, the measure against which all evil seems to fall short. As it happens, when the British journalist Douglas Murray went to visit Egypt a few years back, he had trouble finding travel brochures at the train station he was at. But Mein Kampf and the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, an anti-Semitic Nazi propaganda piece, were on sale in public. The Muslim parts of the world are the only real places where Nazi ideas are still popular. Only in the Middle East could a national leader like Ahmadinejad say that the Holocaust didn't happen, but we really kind of wish that it had, and maybe we'd do it properly if given the chance. This is the religious region of the world where the reward for homosexuality is defenestration, or worse. And this justified explicitly on theological grounds, as is the anti-Semitism. Though, perhaps, there is an old alliance mindset at work. After all, the Ottoman Empire, once called the Caliphate, was one of the largest and longest-standing empires in the world. It sided with the Germans in the First World War, but was defeated. It was brought back to life, and sided with the Germans, with the Nazis, again in the Second World War, and again was defeated, and this time dissolved for sure. Now, today, there is a very strong and fast-growing movement to reestablish a third caliphate, a third empire, a third Reich, if you will, in the 21st century. Now, to my knowledge, it is the only imperial movement with broad international support that is alive today, let alone a fascistic imperial government and movement. There's actually one further point that has to be mentioned, which, in my view, makes Islam not just equivalent, but worse than Nazism. And that is its attitude towards women. It is true that the Quran and the Hadiths do not advocate genital mutilation or the burqa. But they do advocate stoning women for such things as premarital sex, infidelity, or in practice for merely being accused of infidelity. The holy texts do say that a woman's word is worth less than a man, and that a woman needs 4 male witnesses to confirm that a rape actually happened. That it is a man's God-given right, literally, to beat his wife, if he deems it to be prudent. Now, I'm an atheist, or a sort of Jungian pagan, basically the same thing. But I have no qualms in saying that America is a Christian nation. I didn't realize how deeply rooted Christian values were in even the secular elements of American culture, until I began exploring paganism, where there's a completely different set of values and corollary behaviors. Is it any wonder that when theology explicitly treats women as inferior and of lesser value than men, then cultural practices like clitorectomies, the burqa, the niqab, the chador, honor killings, and liberal use of battery acid on feminine faces, is it any wonder that any of those are normal, even if they're not theologically explicit? Is it any shock that a rape game like Taharush comes over to Europe as well when you invite the people and their religion and their culture? These values are explicitly and inextricably religious, just as the non-violence is to the Jains, as murder is to the Thugi, as mindfulness is to the Buddhists, and as meditation on the love of Jesus is to the Christians. So, to summarize, Islam is what it is today because of its very clear and very literal text. This connection is explicit, and the resulting character of Islam is fascistic. It is imperial. It is anti-Semitic. It is anti-gay. It is totalitarian. It is misogynistic. And if you think that it can be simply ignored, that we can live alongside this existentially and oppositionally opposed worldview that must be taken literally and absolutely, then you are grossly underestimating the psychological power and the misunderstanding the faith of Islam and what it has to offer to people. As I said before, I really respect the faith, and it's from this respect that I'm telling you that you cannot ignore it or hope to westernize Islam, as Majid Nawaz is nobly but vainly attempting. Muslims are Islamizing Europe, which may very well be beyond saving now. And they will do it in America too if they can. And now here we are today, inundating ourselves with millions of refugees who are not refugees, to prove to ourselves how good of people we are, and to fulfill a dream of international unity and mutual obligation, first invented, ironically, by someone who is themselves an overt racist. That's Woodrow Wilson, for those of you who aren't aware. There are 3 things you can do about this, at least 3 things I can think of. 2 are mental, 1 is physical. First, stop thinking about what America owes to the rest of the world. No other country on this planet thinks about what it owes to America. Unless you personally invaded the Philippines in the 1930s, then you and others in your country who also didn't invade the Philippines aren't an imperial power and aren't answerable to the crimes and the successes of previous Americans. Most of those countries that you have been taught to look down on and to apologize to would have done the same, if not far worse than America, if only they had the technological capability. It's not a moral issue here. We shouldn't hate the rest of the world and should help them out, especially when they're our allies, but we do not owe anyone anything just because they exist and we have done okay for ourselves. Secondly, I want you to look at Muslims the way that you look at Nazis. Not Islam the way that you look at Nazism. Look at Muslims the same way that you look at Nazis. Now, let me clarify this. Like Muslims, most Nazis held their loyalty of convenience and not of conviction. Most of them are very good people. Most of them aren't particularly good at being Nazis or Muslims. But none of that changes the end result when the tipping point of acceptance for an idea is reached. It must not be reached here. Not here. I want you to think when you hear someone say that they have Muslim friends. Or worse, when they incredulously ask with that challenging tone, do you even have any Muslim friends? I want you to mentally replace the word Muslim with Nazi. Replace fascist with fascist, if you will. I would ask them later, perhaps, dude, why are you hanging out with these people? They're nice people. All of the Muslims at the Muslim Student Association I spent time with were really nice, funny, polite, cool people. But the bad idea does make them bad people when you submit yourself completely, as Islam calls for, to this bad idea. Who you are as a person must be treated as a choice. And religion is, as Sargon of Akkad pointed out in a recent video, a matter of who you are and not what you are. Anyone could be a Muslim, and anyone could choose, like Ayaan Hirsi Ali, not to be a Muslim. Conversely, everyone could be a Muslim if you defer the conflict out of cowardice for long enough. And thirdly, here's the more physical thing, and some of you might sort of want to vomit at this. You can vote for Donald Trump. Is he the perfect candidate? No. Is he the second coming of Jesus? No. But he's the only candidate who isn't enslaved to corporations whose international business interests enjoy seeing more immigration. He doesn't pander to populist notions of contemporary morality, like Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton, and was the first one to broach the subject of immigration. Admittedly, the moratorium on Muslim immigration will be difficult to enforce, to put it mildly. It cannot possibly achieve 100% success. It can't keep out 100% of the people whose ideals and interests are antagonistic to the principles of our nation and our civilization. But it can keep out a lot. Hell, if it keeps out 60%, and in all honesty, it's more likely to keep out 95%. That's more than enough. Now, one final note, and I sort of hate to say this, but it needs to be said. To any people who I might have accidentally convinced too far on this matter, don't go do something stupid. All right? Don't go physically attack someone over this stuff or start, ranting out your ass on social media. Don't go, saying Muslims get the fuck out of our country or anything like really, really stupid, like just from a tactical thing, but also because most Muslims, especially American Muslims, are religious in the same way that Catholics are. Most of them probably haven't even read the Quran. They probably have friends who are gay and they don't care. They probably eat pork and they probably drink alcohol and won't care about it so long as they aren't surrounded by more devout Muslims from more feverish parts of the world who will make them care. Many are probably only Muslims because they don't want to alienate their parents. Or at least not just yet. So a proportional reaction in politics is the most effective reaction, and overreacting would be almost as stupid as doing nothing. Just change who you spend time with. Change who your friends are based on this. And most importantly, really make the effort to come to terms with what Islam is. Do some outside research if you have to. Read the Quran. Read the Reliance of the Traveler. Read the Hadiths. Watch Christopher Hitchens and Tariq Ramadan debate. Islam, though, to summarize, Islam is a totalitarian ideology. It is a fascistic guide not merely to spirituality, but to politics, to law, to love, and to conquest. You no longer have a choice in this matter. You have two options. One is war. The road of the free man has always been this one. In the other direction lies the road of submission. That's the second option. Submission to the one true God and his prophet. There is no third option. only differences in degree. For Europe, it may be too late to choose freedom, but America, and particularly the left in America, needs to really make up its mind on exactly how much they value freedom, on exactly how they feel about Nazis, about fascism, about theocracy, and about whether or not they have the courage to say it when they see it.